Hello and welcome to a very special two-part edition of the Infinity Factory. I'm Richard Metzger. I say very special because on today's show, my esteemed guest and co-host and good friend, that wrecker of civilization himself, Mr. Genesis P. Orridge, has graciously agreed to join me in a 2-hour interrogation of Robert Anton Wilson, author of over 30 books, including the Illuminatus trilogy, Mask of the Illuminati, The Cosmic Triggers, Part 1, 2, and 3, and Quantum Psychology, amongst many, many others. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Well, you are a native New Yorker. You're born in Brooklyn, right?
Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn a long, long time ago. I lived in Brooklyn first 24 years, then I lived in Manhattan for 2 years. And then I started moving west, New Jersey, Ohio, Chicago, where I worked for Playboy, and then California for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to Ireland for 6 years. I had enough of the United States for a while. Then I began to... Well, in Ireland you have 9 months of winter and 3 months of filthy weather. And after 6 years of that, I moved to Los Angeles and really enjoyed the sunshine for a year until I noticed how much smog came with the sunshine.
Yeah. So tonight's lecture, you're here to give the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture at the Harvard Club. You're the guest of the Institute of General Semantics, and the title of your talk is "The Map is Not the Territory, the Future is Not the Past." So what are you going to be talking about?
I'm going to be talking about the map and the territory and the future and the past. Well, I'm going to be talking about conspiracy theories, chiefly because I'm writing a book about that and it's on my mind. I find the lectures go best when I talk about what's really on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll keep bringing it back to Korzybski's great model for understanding communication and thought, that the map is not the territory. What I say to you is not what really happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what you hear is not what I say to you. Your map of what I'm saying is not what I think I'm saying, and what I think I'm saying is not the truth of what I experienced. And you got to distinguish between these levels. The future is not the past means simply that we can't expect a repetition of anything in the past. Things are always changing. The second law of thermodynamics guarantees that everything is changing on the cosmic level, and the law of information guarantees that everything is changing on the sociological level. So we live on a thin edge of coherence surrounded by chaos.
So it also says that you're going to be talking about NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and I know you do workshops associated with Richard Bandler's theories.
Yes.
Are you planning to speak about that tonight? That's what it says in the thing that I got sent by the General Semantics Institute.
Oh, good. I like that.
They're anticipating, I think, an NLP lecture.
It's good to know what they expect, so I can put some of that in anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, just pondering what you were saying, and you were saying that the future is not the past. So there's two instant things that come to mind. One is there seems to be at present with computers, technology, the ability to recall everything that we might generally say was the past, even subjective past, consensus past. All the information that's recorded is available again and becoming more so. So the past in a sense is more huge, and yet if that's not the future, and people somehow proclaim technology as a sign of the future, what is the future and where does technology come into that, this interface between, and if you like, an increasing sense of past and information, and yet the future being something quite different, which each of us individually might strive to discover?
Well, we got a lot of past as individuals. We don't know how much future we got. We could all be killed by a falling meteor before we finish this show. And the same is true as a species. We got a long history. The biosphere of the Earth has a 4 billion year history. So there's a lot more past that we know about. We don't know how long the future is going to be, but however long it's going to be, we're going to be living there. We're going to be living in the future, not the past. So I think the future is worth a lot of attention.
So would you say that sometimes people are being diverted by the ease of the past, the ease of access to this huge past, when in fact maybe they should, if you like, unplug from that and take time off to consider different futures?
Oh yeah, different futures. I don't believe there's one foreordained future. There are many scenarios. What I try to do is encourage the more hopeful scenarios and discourage the gloomier ones.
You will find yourself slowly dropping out.
I like that.
So we were talking about futures and pasts, I believe, and I was saying during the break that I was very excited to hear the word hopeful in conjunction with future, because I've personally met so many people over the last years that have an apocalyptic, it's the end times view, and they see the end times as inevitably bad times, as inevitably suffering and retribution and that old mythos of, you know, getting your comeuppance for having had a good time or whatever it might have been. So hopeful is actually an unusual word in our culture to associate with a future, especially with an awareness of it being possibly very short, an unknown length. Could you tell me how you came to the feeling of hopefulness in future at all?
Well, in the first place, we don't know what the future is going to be, so we should be agnostic about it. But the extreme of despair leads to ulcers, high blood pressure, heart attacks. It's not good for the health. The extreme of optimism tends to lead to radiant good health, prolonged youth, longevity, and a lot of good effects. So psychologically and neurologically, it makes a lot of sense to be an optimist. Timothy Leary was an optimist up until the day he died of cancer, even though he knew he was dying for 2 years. Nietzsche regarded optimism as a sign of health and pessimism as a sign of illness. And I tend to agree with Nietzsche. In addition to that, I think besides choosing optimism as a health measure, it's also a rebellion against the dominant pessimism of our culture, the decadence, as Nietzsche called it, of pessimistic cultures. And it's also an attempt to start a dialogue. If everybody agrees that there's no hope, there's nothing to talk about. If somebody says there is a sign of hope, then we got something to argue about. We can have a discussion.
Why would it be that the dominant feeling is one of pessimism, though? You've got the sort of born-again Christian types, and, you know, what they subscribe to is a very negative thing. Jesus is coming back. Before that happens, all hell breaks loose. It's Armageddon time.
Well, as Our Lady of the Flower says, Jesus is coming back, and boy, is he pissed off at the maggots. That really gasses me. This woman in Queens who channels Jesus, you know.
Oh, Veronica Lucan.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's hilarious. I think there's so much pessimism around because people don't understand what's actually happening. I think what's actually happening is, in the first place, information is doubling faster than it ever has before in history. There was one doubling of information between Christ and Leonardo da Vinci. There was another doubling between Da Vinci and the steam engine, and another doubling between the steam engine and the airplane, and another doubling between the airplane and the first computers around 1950. And then information doubled in the 1950s, doubled by 1960. Now it's doubling every 18 months. We got this downpour of information, and it's coming over the internet now. The information is flowing not only faster, but in more directions. And this is causing massive social changes, some of them good, some of them bad. But it's part of the process of changing from an industrial civilization to an information civilization. And it's partly information creates fractals. As information flow increases, the number of fractals, mathematically speaking, increase. This was demonstrated by a mathematician named Theodore Gordon. Fractals are unpredictable functions, so things are becoming more and more unpredictable. Now, to those who can stand unpredictability, that makes life a lot more interesting. To those who can't stand unpredictability, that leads to a lot of conspiracy theories, pessimism, and general apocalyptic visions. If I could enlarge on that for a minute before I get another question. Consider with 1987, that was 10 years ago. What happened in the last 10 years? Nelson Mandela not only got out of jail, but he's now president of the Union of South Africa. Apartheid died, power sharing came in, the Soviet Union collapsed, the biggest nonviolent revolution in human history. The Palestinians got their own state. The internet grew much faster than anybody thought it would, and it's growing faster all the time. The IRA and the British are finally talking after years and years of the British saying we don't talk to terrorists, which, by the way, is a belief system. I say belief system because if I say BS, people will misunderstand me. Basically, rich people don't do their own killing. They hire governments to do it. Poor people have to do their own killing, so they get called terrorists. Rich people are just called rich people with governments. And when they say we won't negotiate with terrorists, that means rich people won't negotiate with poor people. That's all that means. But if the poor people keep up their terrorism, their war, or whatever, their war of liberation, their terrorism, whatever, if they keep it up long enough, eventually all the rich people eventually decide we got to negotiate with them. Just like the white South Africans decided they had to negotiate with Mandela. The British have decided they got to negotiate with Jerry Adams. The Israelis decided they had to negotiate with Yasser Arafat. Eventually they do have to negotiate with the poor people. And that'll happen in this country too. They're going to have to negotiate with the poor people eventually. Although this will be the last country in the world, probably.
Yeah, really, what shape would you foresee those negotiations taking? I mean,
the reunion movement has to revive. Reagan practically killed the labor union movement, but now there are so many people unemployed, so many people shaky in their jobs. Their purchasing power has gone way down, while the profits of the corporate owners have skyrocketed. Well, there's going to be a response. I don't want to use the word revolution because I don't know what form it'll take, but there will be a response.
Might that take the form actually of becoming, may it just take longer? Because I always feel that the United States is probably the most successful empire so far in terms of being able to spread and occupy and transfer its cultural values worldwide. Might it just be that it'll take longer, but it would be a global poor people's revolt against the new world order of the United States?
Yeah, I think it will have to be, because American workers now are not competing with other American workers. They're competing with slave labor in Southeast Asia. As a matter of fact, I think that's the main reason why we still got the anti-pot laws. That helps fill the prisons. Building prisons is our #1 growth industry. And if the Supreme Court has ruled convicts do not have to be paid the minimum wage. So as they stuff the prisons with more and more people, the United States is more and more capable of competing with slave labor in Red China. Well, so they're going to keep filling the prisons.
That's true. Well, they make blue jeans are made by prisoners now, and T-shirts and all sorts of consumer items.
There are airlines and lots of companies have convicts doing their credit card phone calls.
And of course, they
You're not giving your credit card number to a convict? That's going on all over the country. 60 Minutes showed several prisons where that's going on.
And then you have the people of Haiti, for example, who are basically now slave labor for Disney.
Yeah.
So there are different ways. So that's the way it's competing, is to find new forms of slave labor. I see. That's interesting.
Yeah, but that can't last. I mean,
it's a stopgap measure.
But on the other hand, there also seems to be, this is a very passive culture. We were talking about this earlier. I mean, so many people are satisfied to work for $5 an hour at a Starbucks, have cable TV, have Gap jeans, and prefab furniture from IKEA. Everything seems okay. I mean, do you detect truly a revolutionary undertow, something that's bubbling up?
It's on the right wing as well as on the left. There's more and more an attitude of we don't trust the corporations, we don't trust the governments, we don't trust anybody with too much power, we don't trust our neighbors either, for that matter. I mean, it's gone too far. But people know they're getting screwed. There's no doubt about that. They just disagree about who's doing most of the screwing.
Yeah, and you see a lot of that on the internet right now. Okay, we're back on the Infinity Factor with Robert Anton Wilson and my co-host today, Genesis Orridge. So before the break, we were talking about the internet and also conspiracy theories and how there's a lot of it on the web, and that you've been doing research for your new book, which is an encyclopedia of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, it's called Everything is Under Control. And it's in alphabetical order. It has every conspiracy theory I can find. And I thought I knew a lot about conspiracy theories from writing Illuminatus. But once I started researching the web, I found conspiracy theories I'd never heard of before.
What are some of the new ones you found?
They're endless. Well, one of the things that's fascinated me in the last week is James Jesus Angleton, who was the director of counterintelligence for the CIA. I found at least 3 sources that clearly call him a paranoid. He spent a hell of a lot of time and money trying to prove everybody else in the CIA was a Soviet mole. Well, that was his job in a sense, but he put a lot of enthusiasm into it. And There's a guy named A.J. Weberman has one of the biggest websites you ever saw, the biggest one I've ever found.
The JFK, he has the Garbology website too, right?
Yeah, and history of the CIA, yeah.
Oh, okay.
This guy is practically a worldwide web all by himself. He's convinced Angleton was the brains behind the Kennedy assassination. He's got tons and tons and tons of evidence. Here's this guy who's stark raving paranoid, and he's allegedly the brains behind the Kennedy assassination. And then I find in researching Pay Due, the Italian conspiracy of the 70s and 80s, where they used Banco Ambrosiano and the Vatican Bank and the Cisalpine Bank in the Bahamas and the Franklin National Bank to launder drug money and make themselves very rich to support a fascist coup in Italy. It turns out that was dreamed up by James Jesus Angleton, too. He was the brains behind that. Very interesting character. That's one of the conspiracy theories that looks plausible, more than plausible. Then there are the real wacko ones, like the reason the gods of Egypt and Africa and Sumeria and American Indians and so on look like animals, part human and part animal, is we've been visited by people from all over the galaxy, all of whom developed out of birds, reptiles, and mammals, and so on. But they develop a human form as their rationality increases. So all these gods are actually extraterrestrial visitors, and we were conquered by a gang from Orion, and we've been enslaved ever since without knowing it.
Is that the Urantia theory, or is that...
No, this is the theory of a fellow named Robert Morningsky, who's a Native American who studied linguistics at the University of Arizona, and he proves everything by etymology and by comparing Hopi legends with Egyptian legends. And it makes a lot of sense if you want to believe that there are that many extraterrestrials who showed that much interest in this planet.
Well, there's that fellow William Bramley.
He has a book on the same theme. I've got that,
right.
The Gods of Eden.
Right.
Charles Fort, I have a note on him, too. Charles Fort was the first one to suggest we're property. That was in the Book of the Damned in 1919. Everybody thought he was joking. Now we got thousands of people who believe that kind of cosmos. There's Zechariah Sitchin in Israel, the same idea. We've been conquered and enslaved, and we don't even know about it.
Well, the thing about his books is he's the only guy who can speak those languages, probably alive in the world today, so you can't really dispute his research with any real authority. It's very difficult to have an argument with a guy who can read something that you can't, so...
Yeah, and anyway, etymology is anybody's game. As Mark Twain once pointed out, you can derive Middletown from Moses. You just drop the O's and add the Iddletown, and it's obvious.
So you've actually got a website where you put up some of your conspiracy theory research, right?
We put it all up. My associate, Miriam Joan Hill, who has helped me a lot with the research. She knows more about web searching than I do, so I took her on as a partner on the book. She's getting credit on the cover for research associate. She's put up a website which every damn conspiracy theory on the web is linked to that site. For everyone that she's found so far, she keeps adding to it. The book is almost finished, and she's still adding new websites for me to look into. I don't know if I can ever finish this book. All I can think of is conspiracy theories like what Paul Valéry said about art. Art is never finished, only abandoned. I'll never finish this. I'll just abandon it. I'll come to a point where I say I can't write anymore. I can't include anymore.
I was just reading in the Village Voice, actually, a week ago. They were doing a series of articles on genetics. And one of the interesting points they came up with there was that there's I can't remember the scientific jargon, but basically you can track back all women to one genetic woman in Africa and all men to one genetic male in Africa now. And that the idea is that different species came from different places actually is now debunked, because they've got this way of tracking one specific item in the spiral, which takes you to an Adam and Eve, and back to the every story is true. It just got jumbled on the way, and people do forget the origins of things. So maybe all these conspiracies are actually all true stories. And so what? What's next?
Well, that was the theme of Illuminatus back in the 70s. The basic idea of Illuminatus is all the conspiracies are true at the same time. They all think they're running the world, but half the time they know they're not, so they're busy guarding themselves against the other conspiracies, like James Jesus Angleton was so terrorized of the Soviet moles and the CIA.
It would almost be a more comforting thought to think that there is one big overarching conspiracy instead of all of these little conspirators fighting each other.
A district attorney I met at Esalen once told me that in any town, any small town in the United States, there are 24 conspiracies fighting over who's running the town. I think as you get up to higher and higher levels, the number gets higher and higher. There's probably 250 conspiracies fighting over who's running the United States.
Now, suppose if we accepted that all the conspiracies were true, and at this point maybe the internet, your book, other activities are exposing them once and for all and saying, here they all are, here is everything, does that somehow lay bare the board of society so that we can make real choices individually as to what we want to be and where we want to go? Is this, if you like, a purging that's happening? Cultural purging of some kind?
I don't think so. I think the main effect of the book will be that people will look up their favorite conspiracy theories and start following the links and run into conspiracy theories they never heard of before. And they'll either get very angry at me for confusing them, or they'll get a little bit more agnostic about their theories, which is the result I hope for.
I think that once you have delved into conspiracy theories for a long time, and I talked with Jonathan Bankin, who wrote the great Crimes, Cover-Ups, and Conspiracies book, he said that after looking at this stuff forever, he was really into it at first, and he thought everything he read was just, it was the aha that he was looking for, and then he realized it was all not necessarily bullshit, but he just couldn't take it that seriously anymore. But that the paranoia that research engendered gave him a new way of looking at things, and he started to realize in a very sort of Noam Chomsky sense that this is the way things are supposed to work.
Well, Roberto Calvi, who was the guy who was the banker who was found hanging from a bridge in London in 1982, he was part of the Pay Due conspiracy I mentioned earlier. He was using the Banco Ambrosiano and 200 imaginary banks that only existed as notations on the computers, and banks that had post office boxes with no other existence to launder drug money. Anyway, he used to tell everybody the greatest novel ever written, the greatest book ever written is The Godfather by Mario Puzo. Calvi used to tell people, read that book, that's all you have to read to find out how the world really runs. Now, what's The Godfather about? It's about people killing their relatives and constantly fighting over who's in charge of the neighborhood. Well, that's the way the whole world runs, according to Calvi. And he was very high in the banking system and the financial system and the religious system of Italy, and to a large extent of much more of the world. His ghost banks were in the United States and in the Caribbean as well as in Italy.
Now, he was actually murdered in the end, is that right?
Yes, I've been researching that since '82, off and on. And the latest news is somebody finally confessed. There's a whole bunch of mafia people in Italy who are confessing to get reduced sentences, and one of them confessed he's the one who strangled Calvi and hung him from the bridge. So that clarifies the matter if you believe that everything mafia people say in confessions is true and not something they're paid to say to cover up for somebody else.
Or to get their sentence lightened, yeah.
Yeah, well, like I always said, when Calvi was found hanging where the rising tide covered his dead body, that's the punishment threatened to Masons who betray their fellows in the craft, and I've always said that proves he was killed by Masons, or by people who want us to think he was killed by Masons.
Now, have you ever actually been approached by Masonic organizations for membership? Have they ever sort of said to you, like, how do you know all the stuff that you know, and we want to confer some sort of degree on you?
I've had two people try to recruit me into Masonry, but I feel it would destroy I couldn't take the oaths because I wouldn't keep them. I prefer being an outside observer rather than being an inside participant. I can't be a Mason, not with the work I do. I can't join anything.
But
I can't join a church
Well, you could be. You want to keep that question mark under the reader's mind, right?
Well, somebody asked Christopher Hyatt if I was a member of the Golden Dawn or the Ordo Templi Orientis, and he said Wilson belongs to all orders and none. I thought that was a nice way of putting it. About 10 years ago, a bunch of people in London got very pissed off with Kenneth Grant, who was one of the outer heads, and they resigned from his organization, and they sent out 1,000 cards to 1,000 writers they admired and made us all outer heads. And I've got one of those cards signed by Aleister Crowley, or a good forger. And so I'm quite willing to say I'm the outer head of an Ordo Templi Orientis, but it doesn't have any members.
Right.
I refuse to recruit any members. I prefer to be the outer head without any, the only outer head who doesn't have any members.
Well, I'm curious as to who else was indoctrinated that day.
I think William Burroughs, quite a few. They sent out 1,000, as I said. It was everybody they admired.
It was funny because Burroughs actually sort of he gave an interview to the Los Angeles Weekly when the art show, when the Ports of Entry show opened in L.A. last year, and he talked at length about the Golden Dawn and about the OTO and his interest in Crowley, which I had never heard him talk about. You probably have, Genesis.
I helped turn Burroughs on to Crowley.
What was his take on Crowley?
Well, I could say that when I first met William in London in 1970-71, when he was living in Duke Street, and it was fascinating because the very first time I spoke with him, he immediately discussed his thoughts on magic in its broadest sense, and showed me notebooks with photographs that he'd taken where he'd sliced out something that he was angry about, in particular the famous restaurant that he didn't like, and he'd sliced out them out of the picture, rejoined it so it was missing as a curse. And most of his conversations on those first visits were about using tape recorders and Polaroid cameras and photographs and modern technology to make things happen in a much more literal way than one might suspect from reading the books. And at that time, I asked him what would he recommend as reading on magic, and he then drew a blank and basically said he hadn't really read very much at that time on it, and he mentioned some book by somebody called Conroy or Conrad, which I bought, which was terrible. So at that point, I don't think he had a particularly traditional interest, so what Bob was just saying would make sense, that it was later on that somebody turned him on to that more traditional aspect.
Yeah, well, I sent him a copy of Illuminatus when it came out in '75, and after that I noticed references in his writings to Crowley and the great old ones from Lovecraft and various other things from Illuminatus, so I assume I had an influence on him.
That would make sense. Actually, talking of Burroughs, that was actually one of the questions that cropped up while I was on the subway coming from Brooklyn, funnily enough, this morning. And just recently, William Burroughs passed on, died, whichever way one wants to put it, and Ginsberg also, and Timothy Leary, who we both knew. Being a reader of the Village Voice primarily because it's free, I noticed that when Ginsberg died, there was a front cover and 2 or 3 eulogies inside, two or three pages of raves and adoration. When William died, it was a photograph and a half a page of very uninformed text, which basically seemed to say he shot his wife and he was a faggot. And I was pondering on that, and two things crossed my mind. One was, why do you think that Burroughs was dismissed so easily, when I would have thought it was obvious that he had to be a serious contender culturally for the last 25 years at least? And also, is there any kind of legacy of the beatniks, as they're often referred to, or is that over? And if so, is there any neo-beatnik activity, or is there something new happening? So that's a 2-part question. You know, part one is...
Well, what I think of is... one day in 1968, during the Democratic Convention, I took Burroughs and Ginsberg to the Playboy Club as my guest. I was working for Playboy at the time. And I was interested in the way they totally ignored the bunnies. The bunnies didn't exist in their universe. And when we parted on the street, when I had to go back to the office to work, Burroughs, who I had met in 1964 and had known for quite a while and corresponded with, Burroughs shook hands with me very formally, and Alan threw his arms around me and kissed me on Michigan Avenue. I think that explains a lot. Alan was very extroverted and outgoing, so he made lots of friends. William was always very indrawn. I think...
Welcome to the Infinity Factory. I'm Richard Metzger. This is the second part of a very special interview with Robert Anton Wilson and my co-host Genesis Orridge, that wrecker of civilization himself.
Good day.
So, we talked about conspiracy theory a lot in the first one, and what was going on culturally and things like that. So I feel like we've dispensed of those things, and now we can get down to some more metaphysical issues. And first off, I wanted to start talking about Aleister Crowley. Now, the two of you have both contributed introductions to this book, Portable Darkness.
That's true. That's true.
And
we did. Yeah, I got to admit it.
Okay.
You got the goods on us.
So,
Trapped.
yeah. Well, the thing is, actually, you're two of the very few public figures who do talk about Crowley. He is still somewhat shunned. I mean, it's not something that somebody wants to talk about in polite company, and yet the two of you have. So, and you're in the same room. I think it's the obvious topic that we want to get into.
I wrote an introduction to another book about Crowley, The Eye in the Triangle by Israel Regardie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have any hesitation in speaking about Crowley. He was controversial, but everybody worth a damn is controversial.
Mm-hmm. He was a heretic. Now, I want to actually bring this up, and probably at the outset, is that what you may not know is that Genesis 6 years ago was basically run out of England in the same sort of campaign of vilification, very similar to what happened to Timothy Leary, very similar to what happened to Crowley in the 20s. So that the tabloid newspapers were calling you the most evil man alive, and
Absolutely, they were, and a wrecker of civilization, and it's true. It's very true, very similar, very parallel. And my answer is always, when I'm told that I have the alliance of all these demonic forces and I am so all-powerful, you know, how come I can't pay the rent most of the time? And I wish I could destroy your civilization in a wink, but unfortunately it doesn't seem that simple. So somebody's not telling me something, because I haven't been given the skills to operate whatever it is you say I've inherited. But
Well, I've been accused of being a CIA agent so many times that I often think of sending a bill to Langley and asking them to pay the back money they owe me. And Mae Brussel accused me of being an agent of the Rockefeller conspiracy. And Conspiracy Digest, I confessed in the next issue, saying David Rockefeller personally comes over and delivers a bar of gold every month, and I got them all stacked in my basement. Woof, woof, woof. And I'm sure she was showing that letter to people for years, saying, see, he confessed. And they would say, what's that woof, woof, woof? And she'd say, well, it's because he's in alliance with the dog beings from Sirius.
and what did she say to that? She probably believed it, right?
I'm sure she believed my confession. She had no sense of humor whatsoever.
Well, what we're really talking about is the way that the consensus rich order that rule different societies, particularly in the West, different techniques they use to discredit those who they consider, rightly or wrongly, enemies or threats to their status quo. I mean, that's basically, it's a technique. You either disgrace it, you turn it into the Reds under the bed syndrome, or you ridicule it. The best way, of course, is to ignore it. Notoriety in and of itself gives you an audience.
Yeah, the New York Times did a very objective obituary on Tim Leary, and then a few days later they did an editorial saying nobody would remember anything about Leary except turn on, tune in, drop out, and nobody even remembers whether that was that way in that order, or was it tune in, turn on, drop out. And that may be true around the New York Times editorial office, but I travel all over the Western world, from Berlin to Maui on my lecture tours. I'm getting around. Every place I go, people are using Leary's 8-circuit model of the nervous system. They're talking about his ideas about computer technology and its liberatory possibilities, his ideas about space migration, all the things the New York Times never printed. The fact that the New York Times doesn't know about it or won't print it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There's a vast Leary culture all over the Western world. Just like a Crowley culture.
Well, the Crowley culture, due to the internet, has gotten bigger and bigger all the time. I mean, in the late 60s, there was a very, very small Crowley culture, and books that you had to spend a couple $100s to get your hands on. Now, thanks to New Falcon and Samuel Weiser, they're virtually all out. The things that aren't out have been put up on the web.
Every day every time I look, I find more stuff under Crowley on the web. There's now a Crowley poetry site that just came up recently. The whole Book of the Law is online.
Now, would you say that the Book of the Law is prophetic? Would you say it was poetry? And is the scenario within that, is it coded language, or is it literal? And what's happening? Could we look at that as being a map? I'm sorry, a territory, not a map.
I have two attitudes as the Book of the Law. One is I'm very open to see how it works out, the verse that everybody seems to have been quoting in the 80s, I am the warrior lord of the 40s, the 80s cower before me and are abased. Well, certainly, and also I will give you a war engine. That certainly sounds like a prediction of the atomic bomb and the whole horror of the 1940s, the biggest war in human history. And the 80s did cower and were abased. Ronald Reagan scared the hell out of the whole world with his threats of nuclear war and his constant saber rattling. And Ronald Wilson Reagan, six letters in his first name, his middle name, and his last name, 666. Can that be a coincidence? When I'm in a certain mood, I think that he was the incarnation of the one who the world cowered and was abased, and everybody's pretty much given up the idea of nuclear war, the whole damn thing. Now they're using other techniques.
And now he's wearing diapers.
Yeah. On the other hand, I think it's amazing that so many of Crowley's admirers never seem to consider the possibility that the Book of the Law was a hoax. Crowley was one of the great practical jokers of all time, and yet they think he couldn't have been joking in that case. Maybe he was. I wouldn't put it past. Crowley suggested the V sign to Churchill, to British intelligence, who passed it on to Churchill.
V for victory, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's also the horns of
Horus.
One of his gods.
Now, you were talking about the idea that the Book of the Law may have been a prank or a hoax, and yet, the whole thing about the numerical significance of the 93, the 31. Charles Stanfield Jones did a lot of research into that and found that there was this sort of impeccable mathematical formula underlying the words. It would have been very hard to hoax that.
Oh, I don't know. You ought to read Clifford Irving's book Fake sometime about Elmire. If Clifford Irving is telling the truth, Elmire managed to hoax the art experts of the Western world to the extent that 1,000 of his paintings are hanging in museums with names like Picasso, Van Gogh, Cezanne, Modigliani, and so on. And Clifford Irving came up with a contract signed by Howard Hughes, which 3 handwriting experts said was Howard Hughes' signature. I think it was Elmire who did the signature on the contract because he was very good at signatures as well as painting styles. But no, I don't think just because something is a hoax doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile. I mean, hoaxes can be very profitable, and Gulliver's Travels started out as a hoax.
Well, what you're saying would mean that Crowley's whole life, his ethos, his private diaries, which may or may not have been for public consumption, they may have been hoaxes too, but that his whole life was kind of a sham. Are you saying that, or am I putting words in your mouth?
Well, you got to read Cosmic Trigger 3, which is about hoaxes and art, and my attitude is you can't really distinguish between the two. Anything that changes people's consciousness is a work of art, and many works of art have an aspect of hoax about them, like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast, Gulliver's Travels, which was released as a book of travels by a sea captain named Lemuel Gulliver. It didn't have Swift's name on it at all in the first edition. People bought it because they like travel books. And then as they turned the pages, they found themselves getting into weirder and weirder stuff and asking, did he really visit these places? Are these places real? They sound an awful lot like England, seen through somebody's eyes who was smoking too much pot or something. It took a while for people to figure out what Gulliver's Travels was. It may take us a while to figure out what the Book of the Law is.
Well, here's a thought. Here's a speculative thought, which is suppose that Crowley was actually the channel, the medium of somebody else's hoax. Suppose that there really are various entities which we might call divine god forms, or we might call aliens, whatever we might call them, who play hoaxes via people who are mediumistic or who are suitable down here, that we're not even aware. You were talking earlier about the animals and so on, and that over the 4 million years or whatever, we have no memory of our roots, our origins. It may be buried in the DNA. Perhaps he contacted something in the DNA, or perhaps something worked through him, so there might be a game of the gods, as the saying goes, happening, of which he was a player.
I like that idea. Crowley himself says in Magic, he says very clearly, don't trust any of the beings entities you contact, not even God himself. They might all deceive you. Which, by the way, became the moral of the one Star Trek movie that Shatner wrote. The one where they encounter God, and God turns out to be a con man.
Well, you know that Pat Robertson, in his autobiography, said that he heard voices, right, that told him to buy... You know, when he walked in and bought the station in Virginia that became part of his TV empire, right, in the late 50s, he said that God told him to buy this station. But he also said that he also heard other voices that he knew were not the voice of God. Now, of course, Pat Robertson may be a schizophrenic, but it's very good advice, I suppose, to not believe these or attribute any kind of external...
Well, the Book of the Law itself says success will be your proof. If the world does move in a Crowleyan direction, that's the proof the Book of the Law contained prophecy, however it got there.
So you would take an agnostic view, then, of the divinity of the Book of the Law?
I take an agnostic view of everything. But the world, if you stop to think about it, the things Crowley was most interested in, the revival of paganism, that's a tremendous movement in the Western world now, America, England, and lots of other countries. The tarot cards, they're more popular than they were before Crowley. The I Ching. Yeah, I think Crowley, like Timothy Leary, had one way or another arrived at the state where he didn't have a single ego anymore. He became whoever he felt appropriate to become at a given time, which I think is, I call it eye-opening. It's not quite the non-ego experience of Zen, but it's a good alternative if you don't have one ego. Well, Crowley himself said a single ego is a very narrow view from which to look at the world. He had many egos, depending on... he had exercises to train himself. Wear a certain ring and he was a pacifist. Put on a different ring and he was a lawmonger. That was one of his early exercises around the turn of the century. And I think those exercises are very well worth practicing.
John, let me ask you this. Who is your...
I do exactly the same things. I choose the accessories are very important. Because
are you a pacifist or a warmonger today with that ring on?
I'm friendly.
Okay.
I'm friendly today. Well, I think it's important. I think Bob's right that wearing a mask, just about everyone would probably agree if they put on a mask, they feel more comfortable behaving in a more outgoing way or a theatrical way or being silly. And if you wear a lot of makeup, similarly. And I think that it is indeed a good practice to experiment with being different people and even often different genders or different archetypes, privately or in public.
If people on airplanes want to talk to me, I'm never Robert Anton Wilson. I just pick out a personality and start playing that role, just for the hell of it.
Who were you on your flight yesterday?
Nobody wanted to talk to me on that flight. Nobody wanted to talk to. Everybody was getting drunk and...
Yeah, sounded like a nightmare flight. So, all right, so back to Uncle. I want to ask you, who is your Aleister Crowley? I mean, if you talk about many, what did you sort of see him as ultimately? What do you think the legacy is?
Well, I used to think that certainly that one of the legacies was something that Bob talked about, which was he was probably one of the very first intellectually brilliant Westerners to synthesize and retrieve all kinds of knowledge, bring things back from the East, from the Orient, rediscover the roots of the Western occult, and to some extent popularize them and make them available, and that has continued to an incredible degree. That in itself, anthropologically, is fascinating. He was prodigious in terms of his output, almost inhumanly so. I mean, an amazing mathematician and an incredible, vivid character. All those things, the celebrity, the notoriety, the use of the media, the pro-sexuality, the experiment, all those things are currents which still go on throughout our society and culture as we speak, and have been taken to some degree for granted by the mainstream without their understanding of the fact it wasn't available that long ago. So the concepts in and of themselves are fascinating And by no means have they played out the story. The story continues, and we're all watching and curious, which is the way to be, I imagine.
What of the Crowley who's the avatar of the Antichrist? I mean, which he considered himself.
Well, he had the initials for it.
Right, right. But he didn't consider himself to be the Antichrist, but rather the avatar, sort of the John the Baptist of that force.
Well, the Crowley that interests me most of all the different Crowleys is the creator of Scientific Illuminism, which was the banner on his magazine, Equinox, a journal of scientific illuminism.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a little jingle once: "We place no reliance on virgin or pigeon, our method is science, our aim is religion." His combination of occult and mystical techniques from all over the world, combined with scientific method in evaluating the results, was something completely new in history, as far as I know. Well, you can find foreshadowings of it in John Dee and a few others, Giordano Bruno, but Crowley did it in a unique way. Science was more advanced in his time than it was in the Elizabethan age. And Crowley had a very clear understanding of how you can do these exercises from yoga or from magic or from whatever field, and scientifically analyze the results to see what the hell was the best model to describe what was going on. He's also a founder of model agnosticism, which is the basic attitude in modern physics. Whatever model you use, don't fall in love with it. You're going to need another model for some other things you're going to have to explain.
Yeah, but he did have certain beliefs about himself and sort of a role that he was put here to play. He was not, I don't think, very agnostic about that. I mean, at his death, he was perplexed.
No.
Some say nothing happened.
John Simmons claims that was his last words, "I am perplexed." Others claim he had different last words. Schuster claims nobody was with him when he died. The guy downstairs just heard him fall over, and he said nobody heard any last words. So we don't know whether he was perplexed or not. I think he was perplexed a lot of times. All intelligent people are perplexed a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at the diaries, especially like the diaries from Tunis, the 1923 diaries, he's sort of wondering, like, am I this divine person? Am I this divinity? Am I this person who was put here to play some sort of cosmic role? And you could argue that point about John Dee as well, that he was there for something. I mean, there was an article that was in Gnosis magazine. Did you read that? It was written by Donald Tyson. He's written some books on Philemon and things like that, and Hermetic science. And the idea is that when Crowley and Victor Neuberg worked the Aethers of John Dee in the desert in 1909, that they were there to open some sort of apocalyptic gateway, that this was what they were there to do, and that they were successful in doing it, if completely or just kicking the door open a little bit.
Well, Jack Parsons went out in the Mojave Desert and did the Enochian calls, and right after that, the first UFO reports started coming in, and then they came in from all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Well,
it's a bit of a magical chicken and egg situation, isn't it? You don't know whether the magician or the sorcerer in any kind of form, whether it be a person doing quantum physics or Crowley, you don't know whether they're executing their will and intent, or whether there is some other program. You know, the Burroughs-Geisen thing of in a pre-recorded universe, who made the first recording? It could be true within all of us. So is there a preordained program, and the entire species is actually moving to some specific final or next phase, an upstepping?
Well, there's this intuition is in all religions as well.
One can see this intuition in just about every religion and every mystical insight, even if it be somebody on Haight-Ashbury in 1965, that the sense of there being a program that is inexorable, and it could, you could argue that the one thing you might say is it's about some form of union or unity. But what that might be, who knows, and whether the individual, whether it's worth concerning yourself with the ins and outs of it is an open question. But I would speculate that Crowley was probably in touch with something we have no words for, which is other than our normal idea of our biological integrity, our individual status as a physical machine and a mental machine. And I think many of us have felt that and experienced that, and that's where those hot spots, as I like to call them, I think that's when they occur. I think that Marjorie Cameron and Parsons were certainly involved in a hot spot. What the fuck it is, I'm not sure, but I think it was a hot spot, and I think Crowley too was a hot spot, and even Ron Hubbard was a hot spot, you know.
Well, obviously he's a very hot spot. I mean, look at how huge his organization is today.
So there seems to be a kind of, I guess, a fractal explosion, and it seems to feel like we're moving towards some revelationary further intuition about what we're doing here and why. But I don't see that as being the old sense of religious or being doctrinaire. I think it's probably something buried deep within the DNA coding, or even the mitochondria or something else, and certainly language itself.
Well, would then the DNA coding have...
But this is my subjective speculation.
Well, I tend to agree with you to a large degree. I mean, did DNA throw up an individual like Crowley? Did it throw up an individual like, not throw up as in vomit, but to bring about someone like Hitler, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Churchill, to accelerate...
Or Robert Anton Wilson.
Or Robert Anton Wilson or Genesis P-Orridge. I mean, to accelerate growth very quickly, to accelerate these fractals that you were talking about in the first part, to accelerate the chaos. And
well, it seems to me when you think about intelligence, individuals can be pretty intelligent, but they all die eventually. They all screw up one way or another. Gene pools last much longer. Einstein was smart enough to escape Hitler and get the hell out of Europe. The Jewish people have survived thousands of pogroms by the Christian world, so they're smarter than the gene pool is smarter than Einstein. Gene pools die out sometimes, two species die out, but you look at Gaia itself, the Earth as a living being, that has handled every problem that's come along for 4 billion years and is doing better all the time. So I think there's a hierarchy of intelligence, and the best any of us can do is cooperate with the highest intelligence that we can contact.
Well, but do you think that, I mean, you're talking the idea of the DNA continuing the intelligence, this timeline, this evolution, were these individuals preordained, in a sense? I mean, did DNA say, we need this to happen? You, and you are going to act out this sort of cosmic script.
I don't even understand how the can opener works, and you want me to answer a question like that?
All right.
It's a position to wonder, but one could also wonder, I think there's a lot of hard work, you know. I mean, Crowley was reckless and committed and absolutely dedicated to take every risk at his own possible demise to try and discover wisdom, knowledge, whatever you want to call it. And I think that certainly is a precursor of any contact with higher intelligence, is that commitment, that intent. And it separates people immediately, just like a mountaineer or a scuba diver or a Cousteau. You know, you risk your entire life and sanity. Maybe you find something. No one really quite knows the internal workings of that.
Well, someone like a Crowley, someone like Tim Leary, for instance, when he sort of survived the sort of witch hunt, he saw himself in jail, and he sort of realized, okay, I'm playing this. They're putting me in the same game they put other sort of major league philosophers in before, and he had a perspective on things that nobody had, you know, that he could only have himself in a way, and try to teach other people about.
Tim said when they put him in solitary confinement, he said he realized this was either going to be hell or a learning experience. He decided to make it a learning experience.
Exactly.
And that was the same attitude he took toward prostate cancer when he had it. This is either going to be hell or a learning experience. I'll make it a learning experience. So he got himself the hell out of the medical profession and the hospital track and all that, and took controlled his own way of dealing with the cancer, and had partied all the way until he collapsed. When I visited him in prison, I always went with the thought, now I got to cheer him up. I mean, that's the way I started. I got over that pretty quick. He always cheered me up. He treated prison like a great big joke. here are these imbeciles who locked him up, and they think they can keep him locked up, and they think they're punishing him, and he's having a high time in there. He's writing books. And, well, in one of the prisons, he was having an affair with a woman psychiatrist. He found his way, no matter what they did to him, he always found a way to have a high time about it. And at Vacaville, he was unofficially consultant to the prison psychologist on the problems going on in the prison. He was doing his own work. Even though he was supposed to be one of the prisoners, he was part of the staff in a very real sense, and he always acted that way.
Well, I think they actually also gave him the behavioral test that he wrote himself at Harvard, right?
That's how he got to Vacaville.
That's how he got, yeah.
He answered all the questions, so he came out as submissive, docile, and easily led, so they put him in minimum security.
Good job.
Which brings us neatly back to Harvard. Maybe after the break we should look at language and control and neuro-linguistic programming, maybe even.
Okay.
Does that sound like a good idea?
Does
I
indeed.
think so.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Naughty.
We got it, it's fine. Okay, welcome to the Infinity Factory. I'm Richard Metzger, and I'm very pleased to say that our guest is my good friend, Genesis Orridge, and we will be discussing the new book, Records of Civilization by Simon Ford. It's an authoritative and extremely well-researched, well-written book on throbbing gristle and Coombe transmission. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Yet again. We must be starting to wonder if we're having a secret deal going on under the counter here or something.
Well, we live here.
Oh, that's right. We
live here.
That's right. I'm round the corner.
Well, they only see us when we're here.
That's true. We don't exist the rest of the time, right?
Yeah. I think that's a better fantasy.
Yeah, I like that one.
So, and I like this book.
You do?
I am very, very thrilled by this book.
Plug.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
well, the thing is, I'm plugging it, but I'm also enthusiastically reviewing it and telling everybody that they should run out and grab a copy of this, because the TG story it's an underreported story, I think, and the history is very ephemeral because the mainstream media was so frightened, I think, by what you were doing back then, that it's taken a while to be able to assimilate.
I think it's taken the prerequisite 23 years or something for everyone to start to feel that we're not going to come back out of our hole and bite them if they say they liked it, something like that. Even in the book, Simon talks about and rather beautifully exposes the hypocrisy of some of the rock journalists of the time who one minute were saying, I went to see Throbbing Gristle live and it was frightening, it was banal, it was powerful, it was out of control, all wonderful things to say, of course, as some kind of an indictment. And then as soon as we split up and released Discipline, the same ones, almost exactly head by head, who'd hated TG and been very pompous and written all this sort of conceptual art bullshit about why they didn't like it. They'd obviously been to art college and were trying to do a structural analysis of something that was visceral, and that's where they probably went wrong. Then all of a sudden it was okay. It was wonderful, they'd misunderstood, but really they knew all along it was fantastic and meaningful and significant and blah, 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 blah. And I remember at the time putting the press cuttings up next to each other in my kitchen. And at that time I used to have to urinate in the kitchen sink. So I would look at, in particular, Chris Bond's remarks contradicting themselves almost word perfectly, and I would urinate in the kitchen sink while I was boiling the kettle. And I think that was about appropriate for the misapprehension of what was really going on.
Right. Well, the thing is, when the mission was terminated, it was safer. Then it was historical in a sense because there was a distance and they could remove it, and then it became a thing, a set piece that could be examined, as opposed to something that was, as you were saying, frightening to them.
Well, we had no interest in playing music or being successful in terms of a music career, and I don't think anyone believed it until at the very peak of having the option of being successful, we stopped. And I think they just lost their breath. I think it just completely astounded them that we really meant everything we'd said all along.
Right.
We really didn't care. We really weren't going to do this forever. We didn't need to be in a band. We didn't want to make people like us. And up till then, I think they thought it was a triple bluff or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then when they saw us walk away and just throw the whole thing down as like a, you know, at the end of a game of poker, here's the hand. I think now they're looking at the hand, they've stopped gasping and taking in their breath, and they're going, wow, they had a straight flush.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Exactly. And when you say you weren't interested in playing music, I mean, I'm trying to compile this Throbbing Gristle sort of best of now from Mute, and so I've been listening to hours and hours and hours of TG, and it's undeniably very musical. I mean, it's visceral in some parts. I mean, you know, Subhuman, you know, the screaming and songs like Subhuman aside, the sort of ambient instrumentals, I mean, it's the TG sound, such as it is unlike anything I've ever heard. And now listening to it, you know, 20-some years past, or 18 years, I guess, past the band's end, there is literally nothing like it. I mean, you can't compare it to anything, even to other industrial music from the time. It's like you listen to Cabaret Voltaire and it sounds like a mutant disco band. TG sounds like modern classical. There's more in common with, say, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, I think, than...
I would say it was more in... I would love for it to eventually, at least parts of it, to be remembered as modern 20th century classical music. I think that would be much more appropriate.
I think that's what's going to happen to Legacy ultimately, because, I mean, I know that the way that I'm trying to compile this thing is that the things that on the albums, you know, like on DOA or 20 Jazz Funk Greats, that send me out of the room or jumping to the volume control so my neighbors won't hate my guts. I think that a lot of those tracks will fall by the wayside, and it's the beautiful.
The more symphonic ones.
Yeah.
There's some beautiful live things that are very symphonic, pulsing, and owe a lot to Ligeti and John Cage and Stockhausen and those kinds of people.
And the Velvet Underground.
And the Velvet Underground in terms of attitude, I think, more than anything else. I think that they opened one door, which was a raw, cynical, urban music, straight from the disenchanted on the street.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, having said that, and despite the fact I love the Velvet Underground, there is also a kitsch flaw in some of the aspirations that became apparent later in terms of songwriting.
Oh, they wanted to be a rock and roll band.
They wanted to eventually, well, not all, probably. I think John Cale actually is the most astute in terms of understanding music, because he comes from an abstract classical background, and he worked with Lamont Young, and I was influenced by Lamont Young and Fluxus. And I think that he, in a sense, is a far more long-lasting musician and composer in every sense of the word, and even songwriter. Paris 1919 is an amazing album of songs.
Yeah, I agree.
Very
I would certainly rather listen to a John Cale album, be it new or old, any day than most of Lou Reed's material, frankly.
Which is interesting, you know, because the motor, the engine of that machine was Lou Reed. But I think that the other similarity is that the Velvet Underground was those people at that time doing something, channeling, if you like.
Well,
TG was for people of disparate ambitions and different secret agendas, personal agendas, who were prepared to use each other quite...
mediumistically, I guess.
Mediumistically, yeah, to make something happen that they could all agree on as a vision, you know, that there was some kind of an animal, some kind of entity that we wanted to manifest. And we all knew it was out there, and we could all feel the shape and the sound and the form of it. We all had a different way to get to it, and we couldn't do it without each other. But split apart, then we get a whole different appreciation of where people go afterwards.
It's true. I mean, all of the post-TG work from the various members is radically different from what you all did together. I mean, as is appropriate, of course, but it is shocking.
I think it's actually very revealing in a way. It's still the four keys to the door.
Okay. So I want to get into the sort of mindset and how you guys found the TG sound when we come back after this break on the Infinity Factory.
And as it's Mother's Day, we'd like to dedicate this to all the absent mothers of the young boys here tonight. I'm sure if they were here watching you tonight, they'd wonder whether...
Okay, we are back on the Infinity Factory. We're with our guest, Genesis Orridge. So we're watching on the video monitor a bit of the live TG experience.
Yes.
And
it's a bit like this today.
yeah, a bit chaotic.
Sticking wires in holes and hoping noises come out. But anyway.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you all did very few live performances, and they were sort of events or psychic rallies.
About 31, 32 in all, in 6 years.
6 years, yeah. So, well, you know, I mean, I didn't see the band live, but I've seen so many videotapes of TG. There is an atmosphere, a psychic atmosphere that's still apparent 20 years on in these tapes. The audience was so wrapped and so into it, or violent.
Well, let me explain one of the ways that worked, which was that it's, I don't think it's even really explained in the book, which is probably one of the weaknesses, but we did actually build, at the very beginning, we spent the first year before we played live ever building equipment, and part of what we built was the PA system. And Chris Carter would do research on what was the most perfect sound in different areas, and what we wanted was bass, middle, and high frequency completely separated.
Well, so I read once that TG was one of the first bands ever to use stereo.
We used quad too.
Right, okay.
Yeah, Pink Floyd and TG probably. So we built reflex bins ourselves out of great big thick wood, so big that I could climb inside and over the back and next to the speaker. They were that big, I could climb inside them. And those were the bass bins. So there was a wall of those. Then there were our own 4x12s that we built with Goodman speakers that were so heavy it took 2 or 3 people to lift each one.
So you felt this on the stage?
Well, let me finish. And on the top, when they were first ever invented, we got piezo horns, and we put a row of them across the entire top. So it was like a great big concrete wall of speakers, not like a heavy metal one though, because it was actually also as clear as a home stereo. But it was massively loud. On stage, as my monitoring on stage, I had another reflex bin that I could climb in, and wedge monitors that we built with 2 12-inch speakers in, and a 300-watt bass amp that was customized. And when I touched the string on the bass guitar, my trousers would move on stage.
Whoa. That's loud.
It's so loud you don't really hear it. You feel it, and the stage often would vibrate, the wood would vibrate when I touched the bass.
Well, you had said something to me once about how you had created an alchemical musical laboratory, both on stage and off, with Robin Gristle. Now, obviously there's a very magical intent to the sound, and what was that? What were you working out for your own interest? And
private agenda?
Exactly.
Well, a long, long time ago, somebody gave me a Victorian book, Zanoni, by Sir Bulwer Lytton, and in that there's a story of a violinist, and from that story, which is an alchemical story, I quickly picked up the idea that there are, if you like, certain combinations of sounds and frequencies that are not like Western music. They're not written down. You can't write them. If you like, you take a violin and you play it detuned at random forever, and perhaps one day you might accidentally, when you're not thinking anymore, strike a combination or bow a combination of sounds that open the door to another dimension. I took this very literally because I tend to believe that everybody is writing the truth all of the time, and the earlier the story, the closer to the original event it is. That's logical.
Mm-hmm.
This story, it turned out, when I did more research, goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years to Tibet, to everywhere. Frequencies and rhythms were used to open up the brain to psychoactive experiences, to other dimensions, to even travel out of the body across the universe to other places and commune with other beings. So that was my personal agenda, to see if this could be done in a contemporary context and taken literally, and therefore the music could be as abstract or as banal as we chose, because we didn't know what the combination was. And my part in that as the lead vocalist and kind of the actual active mover on stage was to try and draw down the possibility of this happening. Not just for me, but perhaps for somebody else there that I didn't know.
Now, what, I mean, the video records, you see the crowd everywhere. I mean, live at Undel School, you've got the young boys in the audience. I want to ask you to tell that story. And then, but it goes to one of the last concerts in San Francisco that's, of course, captured on videotape. And you see the famous bit during Discipline where the skinhead sort of comes forward from the audience. And you see him on the mouth, throw him back in, and he's having a religious experience.
He's in rapture. He's absolutely in a religious rapture.
It is a startling piece of tape when you see that.
It is. I'm so happy they caught that. It was amazing. And I think that's why there was so much confusion when we played. I mean, most of the documentation was live, that journalists would review live things, and that would be when they were the most petrified, if you like. I've had people come up at the London Filmmakers Co-op, I don't know what we hit, but 2 or 3 people came up saying they had spontaneous orgasms, all girls, watching. And we tried to pin down the time that they had the orgasms in the concert to try and figure out when we played the tape back what it was that set that off. But we couldn't pin it down completely, but we tried to loop the basic time zone and future events as a subliminal.
Well, I think that the managers behind the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC have perhaps figured out what that sound is.
I don't think they figured out what the sound is. I think theirs is a more straightforward approach to that, which is just hysteria. Hysteria works too.
Yeah, well, the loud, the throbbing bristles, the gristalizers, the sound, the lights, all of this.
Absolutely, the spectacle itself engenders religious awe, and of course a cathedral is built for the same reason, in the same way. It's built as a huge cavernous bass bin, basically, that resonates the deep frequencies which come from the organ.
Oh, it's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you have the choir singing the very high frequencies like the piezo horns, and then you have the stained glass windows and the candles and the incense and so on, which are the high parts of the brain, and it's exactly the same intent.
Isn't that interesting to think of a medieval architect looking into the sound, the resonance of these buildings?
Not at all, because don't forget that cathedrals are just an extension of stone circles and so on, and everyone knows now and has finally scientifically agreed that stone vibrates. In fact, there's talk of making a computer using crystal, quartz crystal. So, 5,000-10,000 years later, people agree with the original story, which is my basic point. So we actually, as it happened, were in an old factory which was made out of great big chunks of concrete. So we were, in a sense, in the bowels of the cathedral, the vaults below.
So we're going to take another break. When we come back, I wanted to talk about what was going on off stage and how the TG laboratory worked at home.
Okay.
And we'll be back with Genesis Peerage on the Infinity Factory after these messages. Wow.
The whole air was like a complex holographic spider's web. It was incredible. And then Chris started to go blind and got tunnel vision. And all the lights, the strip light fluorescent tubes that were on chains, hanging quite heavy ones, started swinging like pendulums, faster and faster and further. But things you would expect, small things on tables, didn't move. And our clothes, of course, were flapping like there was a big gale, but there was no wind. It was amazing.
Now, how many hours would you leave these machines running before this kind of effect would take place? Because obviously, when it's feeding back, it's building, right?
It would build till it reached its own level. Sometimes 24, 36 hours, sometimes less.
And you were doing this at a high volume.
Oh, this was so high you couldn't really measure it. It was sort of beyond pain threshold, really.
Right. I mean, I can remember a couple of the early psychic TV events.
Because it was going nowhere, because these walls were about 6 foot thick concrete.
Okay.
So, as you probably know, with the attempts to make low-frequency weapons, they have to build them into concrete to direct them and the best base bins of all are surrounded with concrete blocks. So we built a huge base bin with piezo horns, it's like a 40-foot square stereo base bin with high frequencies.
Now,
buried in the ground. I mean, what more perfect place to experiment?
Well, when you were doing, I mean, like right now, just looking at the monitor, I mean, when TG was on stage in this alchemical musical environment, as you were pointing out before, you were sort of leading the charge and bringing it down. And what physically went through you? What did you feel like when you were on stage? I mean, some of your performances are absolutely crazed.
Well, I would try to not think. I would basically try to go into a trance.
Well, and sometimes the lyrics were just pure glossolalia.
Eventually, yes. I mean, I was calling down information from other places whenever possible. There were certain points later on where, partly to placate other people in the band and partly from pressure of work, we would have riffs that we would repeat. So we would do something that was more or less a song, like Discipline. But with that one, in the end, I pushed it where we did a 30, 45-minute version of Discipline.
Right.
Just over and over and over and over, which is more like a mantra than it is a song.
I would say by the end of that, it's
And I got more and more friends, and I was like smashing my head with the microphone stand on the rhythm over and over and over. I didn't actually get hurt at all.
Incidentally, we are talking about the song that you can hear in the background. Currently, this is Discipline being performed at the Lyceum in London.
One of the problems that did start to occur, though, was that there was, towards the end, that I was, in a sense, becoming more regularly possessed, or one could say more efficient as a mediumistic channel, as a transmitter-receiver. And I think it was rather disturbing for the other people in the band. And probably made me somewhat unbalanced in terms of retrieving my own self afterwards. So it caused tension, personal, emotional tension between the 4 people, just because I was so far out when it was happening. And they weren't, because they were all doing very deadpan actions. They were doing things that made this incredible sound, but the actual doing of it was actually rather considered.
Very technical.
And I was the random element, the random chance, the third mind, if you like, of the others.
Right. So TG did not actually rehearse. Is that true?
No, we didn't rehearse, because the first year, when we were still also Coom Transmissions, which is the first part of the book, we would, every Friday, Saturday and Sunday, we'd meet at my house in Beck Road in Hackney, and we'd go over to the Death Factory, and we would just build equipment, experiment with equipment, find out what noises it made, what it shouldn't do, what it should do, and just record everything on cassette tape. And that was how we built the intuitive reactions between us. But we did that purely for a whole year on our own, privately, without anybody else knowing.
So Coom Transmissions, the performance art troupe, it was primarily you and Cozy, Manny Tutti. At what point did the performance art actions become TG?
October the 26th, October 1976.
Mm-hmm.
At the prostitution show at the ICA.
Right. So this is actually several months before, say, the Sex Pistols were known.
Oh yes.
As well. So this was not. It wasn't even like a. It was a. It did sort of come before punk. I mean, in
it
the sense of
predated punk because
months.
it was actually 18 months old when we did that show, and we'd actually performed as Throbbing Gristle 2, maybe 3 times before at arts festivals over the summer and the spring.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of going as Coombe when we could, they'd ring up and say, will you come and do a Coombe Transmissions thing? And I would say, well, we'd rather be Throbbing Gristle. We had one in the Air Gallery and a couple of other places. I can't remember off the top of my head. And those are all on the 24 hours of Throbbing Gristle cassette tape set.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that. Industrial Records was the way that you got the propaganda out.
Right.
It was really the first indie, in the sense that we know it today, indie do-it-yourself record label, right?
Probably close, because Rough Trade and the punk labels hadn't begun at that point. So, I guess.
What sort of numbers were you pressing up on vinyl?
Well, the first album, Second Annual Report, we did, I think, 789 copies, because that was as much as we could afford to press. We had a check, and we gave it to the pressing plant, and we just said, how many albums can we have for this check? And they pressed 789. And in my innocence, I assumed it would take 3 years to sell them.
Right.
Mail order.
How fast did they sell out?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. But that actually begets another point, is that 789 albums sold to 789 people may get listened to by, some multiple of that number, but until they were re-released on CD by Mute, not all that long ago, they were very. That's the reason that I think the TG history is murky, is you couldn't actually get the product for a very long time.
Well, that's not strictly true, because we met this guy at one of the gigs called Rod Pierce. And Rod Pierce was a very interesting man from Ireland. And I was wearing a General Idea t-shirt with Fetish on it in white lettering. And it was at Goldsmiths Art College, one of the Goldsmiths gigs we did. And he was just blown away. He had an epiphany too. And afterwards he came up and said, are there any records? And we said, well, there was one, Second Annual Report, but we sold them all. And so he said, that's terrible, it should be available. And we said, well, then why don't you make it available? And he said, what do you mean? And we said, start your own label. He said, really? And we said, sure. We'll let you release it as a legal bootleg, if you like. License it to you, and then you'll have a label, you can sell them, you can use the money to do other records, we don't care what you do. And to his credit, he went off and started Fetish Records, re-released Second Annual Report, later on did the box set of albums, the vinyl albums.
Right.
But he also did Clock DVA, Bush Tetras, oh gosh, all kinds of people. 23 Skidoo, the Bongos, and had quite a thriving indie label for a few years as a result of the moment of hearing TG live.
Again, it's interesting that this was not, the history of TG is not something that's been folded into the history of punk. It's a very parallel history.
Yeah.
Much artier, obviously, than punk, in the sense that you all were fine artists.
But none of us, well, I think Chris Carter went to an art college briefly, but the rest of us never did.
But you and Cozy were well known.
We came
and
from the art
well-regarded
world,
performance artists.
but in the art world we were punk, so
right. I would think that some of the actions that are described in the book, it would be difficult, I think, to get more far out or more avant-garde than some of the things that you and Cozy were doing.
We were having fun. Young people must have their fun.
Good, clean fun.
Yes. Well, not that clean. I really would recommend it, not because it's a book about us, but I would recommend people read this book because in terms of the chronology of the history of alternative popular culture, it really does set the record straight in terms of what you've been saying, that we were on the TV discussing prostitution and art and the outrage we'd caused at the ICA weeks before the Sex Pistols went on. You know, we were the ones who picked the members of Chelsea. We were the ones who encouraged all these other people to do things. And while that doesn't mean anything special about us, I think it's good for people to remember that there is a lineage and it comes from somewhere unexpected. It didn't just suddenly begin with the shop Sex.
Well, Simon Ford the book's excellent because he does present the lay of the land. And when we come back from the break, I wanted to discuss the prostitution show at the ICA when Throbbing Gristle debuted the musique concrète, retail sound. We'll be right back with Genesis Peerage after these messages. Infinity Factory, I'm Richard Metzger. We're talking with Genesis Peerage. And I would like for you to, if you will, describe the reaction that everybody from Buckingham Palace to the tabloid newspapers had when T.G. debuted at the Institute of Contemporary Art in 1976 at the Prostitution Show.
Well, it was one of my my classic events. In fact, I'm working on a new one right now, which I wouldn't mind mentioning. On the 1st of May at the Royal Festival Hall in London. It's called Time's Up, and it will feature the original Hyperdelic Psychic TV, the master musicians of Jajuka with Bashir Attar doing the Rites of Pan, Question Mark and the Mysterians, the Headcoats.
Question Mark and Mysterians of the 96 Tears.
Absolutely, the original lineup.
That's great.
The Majesty, my new project as well, and Quentin Crisp will be the Queen of Ceremonies. And this will be in the Royal Festival Hall, which was built for the Queen of England in the 50s for her coronation and is customized for symphony orchestras and the very best of international and British culture. John Cale actually just did a sold-out night there, funnily enough, but also mainly it's symphony orchestras, operas, and so on.
Oh, didn't the Pink Floyd do their 14-hour Technicolor Dream?
No, I thought so. It turned out they were in the Queen Elizabeth Hall, which is smaller, which is attached. So we're in the big one.
Aha. Well, that's not bad. So they kick you out of the country 7 years ago, and now they're welcoming you back, and you're going to get the Queen's box, right?
We get the royal box for my family too, yes. So who knows what fireworks might occur. But in the same way, at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Arts, was literally on the Mall, which is the road that leads to the gates of Buckingham Palace in London. And it's a Regency building, and it's been the home of the best of avant-garde British art, supposedly, since it was converted, I would rather say, I think in the 60s, the early 60s, maybe the late 50s. I know Brian Geising did something there once. And that was one of the things that the newspapers picked up on. Our show...
Well, what was there? It was a retrospective of
It was a retrospective of Coombe Transmissions, which included all the porno magazines that Cozy had been in, framed beautifully on the wall. Well, they were going to be on the walls. So they were in grids, and they were basically an ironic joke on conceptual art, which at that time was very popular, was photographs with text. So we thought, okay, photos and text is very trendy with silver frames. We'll do that.
But these were being cut straight out of a porn mag.
Just cut straight out of magazines. But they all had her in the photos.
It's a brilliant idea.
And then she signed them all. And we assumed that as she signed them, and they were grids of photos with text, that therefore they must be art because everybody else's was.
Just to interrupt you quickly, I had a porn magazine, I think it was White House magazine, and it had a contest. And it was supposed you had to guess, name this famous art duo, avant-garde art duo, and it was you and Cozy in a porn magazine. You had glasses and a hat on.
And I was wearing a Woolworths T-shirt.
Yes.
Yes, I remember that. So, but at the actual opening, it was the same thing. In a way, all we did was we'd think, what normally happens, how can we change it? That was always our basic strategy. What do they expect? Let's do the opposite. It's a really good strategy. I recommend it to everybody. So it was, well, normally at the opening for a retrospective, there's wine and art critics and people from art magazines. Boring. Well, how about if we have no wine, we don't bother to invite art critics, we don't invite art magazines.
Invite your friends and have a party?
Let's have a party. And let's invite newspapers and magazines that aren't interested in art. So I went and bought all the daily papers, and I wrote down the addresses of all the news editors, and I mailed them invites. And
Well, as not so much to invite them, but to serve as the. They could then take your current to the mass audience, who of course were outraged by this.
I just thought it was a good idea. I didn't really fully realize how seriously they'd take it. I bumped into some friends who were all 6'2" and above drag queens who did security. So I thought, great, you can be the security. So we had transvestite security guards. I had a friend who was a blue pornographic comedian in the north of England. I said, why don't you come and tell dirty jokes? He went, great, no problem. Let's have a stripper. Let's make it like an English working men's club. Well, let's make it not for the elite. Let's make it for the working class. So we had big barrels of beer and a striptease dancer and a dirty comedian.
And you're leaving off one great detail, is that you had made some Fluxus sort of sculpture using Cozy's used Tampax.
Oh, but that was a minor detail to us. That was the one they all picked up on, but that was actually a throwaway because there was an empty wall.
Right. So you know what? We're out of time.
We're out of time.
But you can read about all of this in Simon Ford's definitive and very well written Records of Civilization, published by Black Dog Books.
Which all 4 members did collaborate with, and so it's the official definitive story and well worth reading. And it reads like it's a good read.
Well, I've actually read this book 3 times all the way through in the manuscript, and Simon did a great job. Okay, they're going to cut us off.
Disinformation is selling it. Go there right now.
Disinfo.com, we'll sell it to you. Oh, yeah. Good night.
Uncover the subtle possibilities of how you can project an idea through a machine to an audience.
All right, Assassin by Harry Crosby.
William moved again to Lawrence, Kansas. So we flew to Lawrence, Kansas, and spent days and days and days, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, indexing every edit and writing a verbal description of every single segment of every tape.
How many hours were there?
Oh, I don't even know. It's a blur. A lot. A lot. I don't know if it got into the hundreds. We also sneaked into the library in Lawrence, Kansas, with a tiny portable cassette recorder, and bootlegged the reel-to-reel tape of William, the only tape of William on mescaline.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
What's that like?
It's good.
Really?
Really good.
What's he talking about?
Weird stuff.
It's
weird psychedelic stuff. Very weird.
Well, I mean,
as if he's channeling, or whatever the word might be. He's receiving and transmitting something. It's not just William.
Wow.
This is William receiving and transmitting stuff.
What, do you still have that tape?
Yes, somewhere.
Man, I'd love to hear that.
And they sort of brought out a ewer and they put it on, and the librarian stood over me saying, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know how I did it, but I distracted them in some way and then taped it.
Well, why did they have it?
It was sold to them years and years ago. He lost track of it. Someone sold it to them, and
Right.
he didn't even have a copy.
Right.
And he was always very embarrassed about that specific tape. He didn't like psychedelics, and he didn't like maybe the integration with something other.
Well,
he had a great fear of death and the other.
Yeah, well, the Yahé letters are full of just sort of a psychedelic revulsion. Also, in Timothy Leary's High Priest, there's the chapter where Burroughs talks about dimethyltryptamine, DMT, and what a bad experience he had with that. He was shot. Who Oscar Janiger shot him up with it, right?
I don't remember.
Something like that.
You know more about this stuff than
horrible.
I do.
Yeah, but he has the horrible.
Yeah, he hated
the aliens leaning over him and everything, which I think sounds kind of good. Yeah,
I think it's a choice. It's definitely a choice. I think it's clear in his work that was a choice he made.
Okay, well, we're going to come back with Genesis Peerage on the Infinity Factory. Stay logged on.
You cannot take woman into space. I repeat, you cannot take woman into space. That is all Hassan Salah. across all your skies, the silent writing of Brian Geisman, Hassan Saba. The silent writing of space, the writing of Hassan Saba. Look. Look.
Well, in the Italian town my family comes from, there's sort of an etiquette. Almost everyone in, maybe 2 generations before me had these experiences, but you were expected not to talk about them much. Everyone had them, and that was a private piece, but it was not remarkable.
You're saying everyone in the town, or the
In
in
the town, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go somewhere like Nepal, you can walk around the street, and again, devotional practice and interaction with ideas of other dimensions and entities is so common that you would be considered strange to point it out.
Well, in India, there are actual, you can sort of make a legal defense that the jinn made you do something, or the jinn did it. I mean, it's a legitimate, thing to say. It's really odd, But why is that? Why in this sort of scientific obsessed culture? Why don't we have those experiences? Where did we fall from that? Why?
I don't know. I can make up that answer.
Okay.
I think everything's crashing around people's ears. All the certainty, as physics and science gets more certain, I think people get less certain, especially in terms of their religious beliefs, the kinds of things that give them grounding at night. That's all falling by the wayside, and then things start leaking. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the leaks.
Well, there's a lot of noise in current life. I mean, so these frequencies are starting to get picked up on. Now, you asked something that I thought was interesting. You feel these things are accelerating? There more people are experiencing this right now.
I'm getting more reports. I don't know what the ground of that phenomena is. Whether it's happening more, I think it's happening more, but as you say, people are noticing it more, they're reporting it more, and they want other people to know about it more.
Mm-hmm. It's more accepted, certainly, in an X-Files obsessed culture.
Right.
Well, have the tenor of the messages changed?
No.
It's always sort of the same sort of...
Most of it is the same sort of new age kind of stuff. Be good to each other. We're friendly. You're friendly. Watch the environment.
Now, what about something that's a bit more profound or a bit more meaning? We have the Urantia book here. This is a very thick book. This was apparently channeled. I guess you know the story. It was...
Yes. No. Martin Gardner has written a commentary on this. That's interesting because what he's pointing out is that the science in here is bad. This is bad science, which is interesting. So another take is it may be not understandable to us because it's religious science. You can take he worked in Europe for a while. Schwaller de Lubitz, who lived in the Temple of Luxor for 15 to 25 years, trying to understand the Egyptian religious science. Now, if you take that kind of take and look at this may be a trivialized version of that same kind of science. So you get someone in the middle of Illinois trying to hear what is basically a scientific text and then put it into their own words and write it down.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with a Russian physicist by the name of George Raznyov?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I think he's in his late 80s now, but he sort of talks about he relates the Kabbalah and physics.
Right.
And it would be interesting.
Kind of thing.
It would be interesting to say that our angels are part of a higher physical, and punning here, reality that we are not perhaps aware of, that in certain psychedelic states would allow you to see, give you access to.
Psychedelic and of course yogic states, Tibetan Buddhist states. One of the things that I think is happening now in our particular time is that we have access to various written and oral traditions. And one thing I think many people are noticing, and one of the new, maybe unnamed genres, is the synthetic amalgamation of the same stories. As I was saying to you today, my starting point with most things these days is I assume everything everybody is telling me is true. And then I think it was Mario in his last interview said, but there's a garbling factor. So I assume there's a huge, big holographic picture, and then lots of fragments are being revealed or illuminated or are catching the light. Maybe now we're in a position with mass technology and cyberspace to start to zoom in and out, to not obsess on the detail, to zoom out and start to see at least the beginning of a jigsaw with bits missing that tends to resonate and consolidate a lot of things that seem to be just metaphysics, and that science is starting to do the same kind of thing when it gets to a certain point, and psychology too, I think.
One of the things I found, it's very dangerous to bring belief systems into your perception of this kind of raw material, because you could have this garbling effect is exactly what you say. In other words, you might have a fairly naive, in quotes, person reading a scientific text, and then they're going to try to bring that back in their own framework. And so they're not telling you a lie, they're telling you some garbled version of what they think they saw, and it may be too strange for them to really represent well.
Well, I was reading in one of Jacques Vallée's books last night about the Fatima apparition, and how certain people saw the Virgin Mary, others saw a woman, some saw a light, a spinning disc. It was all sort of a, this is whatever your sort of imprint was that you were bringing to that experience is the way that you perceived it. So that must often happen.
I think it does. I talked to, we were in Mexico, and I talked to a guy down there. This is a pretty untouched person, just ordinary person, was walking through the woods, stood by a rock. The rock split open in a typical sort of vesica shape, and within that there was a woman. Now, he had no reference point to talk about that and didn't know what to put it in, but he really had some sort of apparition from another reality. And he was not high, he wasn't doing acid at the time, he was just, this is an ordinary farm person. So this happens. People leak. Every once in a while, it opens up.
Now, have you noticed that, say, a Latin American person reporting something like this does report a much different flavor to the experience than someone who's, say, from Milwaukee, or?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so, but I don't know enough. I don't know, have enough data in those categories to really say that. I talked to some of the Indians in Mexico about their entity experiences. The entities, the basic dimensions are about the same. In other words, they're about 3 feet tall, largest heads, but then some of the details change. In other words, some of them have soap bubble skins where they see flashes of color all over the skin. So some of the details may be colored by culture, where the general formal characteristics are actually the same.
Something actually happened, or did the brain construct the happening? And if so, why does the brain choose to do that? And is it going backwards in time to perhaps a DNA memory, or is it able to jump between our normal ideas of time and space? That's really what's the basic place to begin, is what's going on there, and accept something is obviously happening.
Okay, we're going to have to go to another commercial break. We'll be back with Mario Pasolini, Genesis Fjorge. Stay logged on to the Infinity Factory. We're back on the Infinity Factory with Richard Glenn Boyer here, and we're talking about Salvia Divinorum. So, we can't hear anything in here. Hello? Okay, we're just going to keep on going as if there are no technical difficulties whatsoever.
All right.
And cut this out later. So, what actually happens then on Salvinorum? I mean, the visions. What are the visions like? I mean, if they're not like DMT, and that's the way everybody seems to want to describe it.
The effects can be variable. One common effect is people say that the first thing that they lay eyes on as the trip is coming on, they become it. To the extent that...
They become the drug?
No, they become the object. So you may be sitting there and you've got this a glass of water in front of you, and as the Salvinorin A is beginning to get into your system, your eyes glance upon the glass, and the next thing you know...
You're the glass?
You're the glass of water. You know what it feels like to be a glass of water.
Oh, really? Well, there was one, I thought, good anecdote that was, the guy was saying he was smoking it, and that he sucked himself into the pipe, and then it became a feedback loop.
There seems to be
pretty heavy. And then there was another good one where the guy said that he looked at a wall, and then he realized that he was stuck on the wall, and part of the wall, I guess it's like being a glass.
Wow. Okay.
It's identification with inanimate objects.
Yeah. It also produces, and depending on the dose, you can get into a state where it feels very, very familiar to you. It feels like you'd smoke, and it's in a kind of a way like from your past. It has this. You have the sense that you'd smoked Salvinorin A or Salvidivinorum when you were 8 or 9 years old.
Does one have almost a panic state of being so closely identified with the glass or not?
Okay,
because that doesn't sound familiar and nostalgic. It just sounds
this is separate.
Freaky and
this
awful.
Is separate. This
okay.
is separate. But
are they separate but concurrent, or
no? Two different types of trips. Okay, one trip is you become an inanimate object. You suddenly know what it's like to be that inanimate object. Deeply, entirely, you empathize with that thing. You are it. You are the consciousness of a glass of water.
It's very existential.
Yeah, if you're a philosopher, you got a lifetime of work to try and unravel what happened to you.
Right.
Okay, the other way that this can work, or one other way, is you just have a sense of well-being. You feel like you understand yourself, and you feel that whatever it is that you have elicited from your mind is familiar, as though you'd smoked the substance when you were a child, or as though you'd somehow had this experience in some kind of eternal life. I mean, however you want to make sense of it.
Well, that's weird, because it almost flies in the face of so much of what I read about it being sort of a panic-stricken feeling.
Yeah, the panic comes in when you have one of those experiences in which you're smeared out onto the universe.
Right.
Smeared into another dimension. And
that sounds
just
DMT.
The hair trigger. It's not DMT-like in the sense of having objects bouncing around, speaking to you, or squeaking, or transforming themselves. I think...
If DMT is Fantasia, what is Salvinorin then?
Well, that sounds like one of those tests I used to take, or books I would study when I was trying to get into college or whatnot. Boy,
it's a legit question, though.
Are you talking about Fantasia, the Disney show? Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to think about that to give you any answer that was meaningful.
Is there any drug other than DMT that you would compare it to? What's that?
Yeah. Well, it's tough because it's like cannabis at low doses. It's like ketamine at very, very high doses.
Really?
A dissociative. You don't remember where you are. You enter a world where your friends are watching you move around. Your eyes are moving. You got rapid eye movement. You're open-eyed. You're walking around the room. When you come down, you don't remember anything about it.
Really?
Okay? Shy of that, you enter something that's like an LSD experience, where it's very visual, closed eye, open eye visuals, extremely rapid associations, visions that seem to be dimensional, but not like DMT, where you've entered into a magical dimension, or a dimension that's always there, but you've suddenly stepped into it.
DMT, you're in another place. It feels very much that you're in some kind of enclosure, almost, another reality that you are fully immersed in, and it's not that way, is what you're saying with this. It's with LSD, I've never had the feeling that I was gone.
Yeah.
I just knew that I had taken LSD. I was kind of aware of it, and I had my own mental, my personality, my integrity, if you will, was complete. Whereas on DMT, that was much less of a concern, and you're saying it's probably even less of a concern.
You seem to go between cannabis high to an LSD high. From an LSD high, if you go a little higher, you're into a disassociated state, like a high-dose ketamine injection. Okay, so no, it doesn't seem to enter a state that's...
A ketamine injection to me felt manageable, and maybe I didn't get the dosage that I've read about. I've only done it once.
Yeah,
but it was quite manageable, and the thing was, I was so drugged, or so I was so I had been pulverized to the point where
you're not going to move.
Everything seemed, no, it wasn't even that. Is that it seemed fine. Like I wasn't in. Being panic-stricken was not part of the equation. It was not part of that experience for me. It was just like,
okay.
yeah, exactly. I'm laying here and I ain't moving.
Yeah, unfortunately, with the higher doses of salvia, and more often with salvinorin A, the person can enter a state of, in their mind, they are somewhere. In their mind, you know, people are in the room and are prohibiting them from doing what they want unjustly. Okay.
Right.
So it's is that a panic, or is that a sense of some kind of persecution? I mean, it's hard for me to really label it, but the practicality of it is that for somebody who's the sitter, you need to be prepared for a situation where your friend is going to act very oddly and may feel that you're doing something that's unfair to them.
Right.
And it's a challenge to react to somebody in that situation.
All right, we have 5 minutes left, and I guess who should take salvinorin? I mean, is it sort of for the grad school psychonaut, or is it for somebody who's, you know, moderately experienced with psychedelic drugs?
Boy, that's a tough question. I don't know.
I think that is kind of an important one, though, when you get right down to it, because it's so unknown.
I think that
someone's either going to have a shitty, horrible experience, or going to have a reasonable experience, but they got to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I would say that the people who would most likely have something that would be beneficial to them are people who have a true interest in lyceum.org. I'm sorry, I think that's http://lyceum.org. You know, lyceum.org.
And then there's the D.M. Turner book.
D.M. Turner's book is up, and I believe that can be found if you go to a page that's run by Daniel Siebert. Daniel Siebert's the first person who had an experience with the isolated salvinorin A. His page, I think you can reach through the Lyceum.
I've seen his page. In fact, you're right. I've seen his page is great because it has a lot of good stories on it.
So I would go to those two sources. And you know, if you're interested in gardening the plant, the Salvia divinorum book has actually just been produced by Spectrum Industries. I think that's probably the best way for people to get an introduction to the plant, is growing it themselves. There's sources listed in the book as to where to pick up the cuttings and, you know, where you go.
Okay, so Richard Glenboyer, thank you very much for being here. You're a lawyer. You specialize in keeping people out of jail for sacred use of plants. And
Try to, yeah.
It's a great thing that you're doing.
Thanks.
And you're also the editor of the Entheogen Law Reporter. And just very quickly give your mailing address so people can get that.
The best way to reach me is through email, which would be one word, specmind, SPECMIND, @cwnet.com. If you have to reach me through the post, it's Post Office Box 73401, Davis, California, 95617.
Okay, Richard, thanks very much for being a guest on the show. It's been really interesting for me to talk to you.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay, I'm Richard Metzger. This has been The Infinity Factory. Good night.
It's the money.